Mid-September 1944, near Lommel, Belgium. The sugar beet field stretches flat and endless under a gray September sky. A Belgian farmer named Karel stands at the edge of his property, watching three young soldiers dig in the mud. They're not planting, they're burying. The bodies lie in a row beside a burned-out German half-track. 6 Wehrmacht soldiers, their gray-green uniforms caked with dried blood and Belgian clay. One looks no older than 17. His face is pale, almost translucent in the weak autumn light. His eyes are still open, staring up at nothing. An American soldier from a Graves Registration Service unit kneels beside him and gently closes them with his thumb and forefinger, a gesture so tender it seems to belong to a different world than the one they're living in. "Where do we put them?" one of the burial detail asks his sergeant, his voice flat with exhaustion. The sergeant shrugs, scanning the muddy field. "Here's fine. Mark it if you can. We've got 20 more sites to clear by nightfall." They dig shallow graves right there in Karl's field, between the cabbage rows and the drainage ditch. The soil is sandy and wet, easier to dig than the clay they encountered yesterday. No coffins, no ceremony, no chaplain reading prayers. Just tired men doing grim work in the rain, their entrenching tools making wet sucking sounds as they carve holes in the Belgian earth. When they're finished, one soldier hammers a crude wooden cross into the mud. On it, he scrawls in pencil, 6 Deutsche Soldaten, September 1944. The letters are already running in the drizzle. Karel watches silently from his fence line, his arms crossed over his chest. These men killed his neighbors. They occupied his village for 4 long years. His cousin Mark was shot by Wehrmacht soldiers in a reprisal action after saboteurs destroyed a rail line. His daughter spent the war years thin and hungry, eating turnip soup and black bread, while German trucks rolled past carrying food to the front. But standing there in the drizzle, looking at that row of muddy mounds, he feels something unexpected. Not forgiveness exactly, but something quieter, something human. These boys in the ground are someone's sons too. They have mothers who don't know yet that their boys are lying in a Belgian beet field, marked by a wooden cross that will rot away before winter ends. He doesn't know it yet, but beneath his beet field lie the seeds of something extraordinary, a revolution in how we remember our enemies. Karl turns back toward his farmhouse, pulling his coat tighter against the cold. Behind him, the American soldiers pack their tools and move on to the next site. The rain continues to fall, the war grinds forward, and 6 German soldiers lie in the mud, their war finally over. Within days, the penciled cross is illegible. Within weeks, it collapses. Within months, you can barely tell where the graves are, but the bodies remain, waiting in the dark Belgian soil for someone to find them again. 1945 to 1946, post-war Belgium. In the cafes of Brussels and Antwerp, the question seems not just absurd, but offensive. Why should Belgium care for German graves? "Let them rot where they fell," someone mutters over beer in a Ghent pub, and heads nod in agreement around the table. They didn't care about us. It's hard to argue. The war has just ended, but Belgium is still bleeding. The official count lists over 12,000 Belgian military dead, 88,000 civilians killed, 25,000 Jews murdered in the camps. But numbers can't capture everything. They can't measure the trauma of 4 years under occupation, the humiliation of collaboration trials, the rage at those who profited while others starved. The scars are everywhere you look. In Dinant, bullet holes still pock the bridge where Germans executed 83 civilians in 1914, and they came back to do it again in 1940. In Bastogne, families are still digging out from the Ardennes offensive, finding unexploded shells in their gardens and basements. In Braindonk, the former SS detention camp still smells of death and fear. And scattered across this wounded landscape are over 100 improvised German burial sites. Some are proper cemeteries with neat rows, established by the Wehrmacht during occupation. Others are just pits by the roadside, where Allied soldiers hastily buried bodies during the chaotic liberation. Many graves have no markers at all, just disturbed earth that will sink and vanish with the next winter, the dead men inside becoming anonymous forever. In the municipal offices, Belgian officials struggle with more pressing concerns. Roads need rebuilding, bridges need repair, Displaced persons need housing. War orphans need homes. The economy is shattered. Food is still rationed. Coal is scarce. And these officials are supposed to worry about dead German soldiers? In early 1947, a Belgian official in the defense ministry receives a letter from an organization in Germany called the Volksbund Deutsche Kriegsgräberfürsorge, the German War Graves Commission. The organization had been dissolved by the Allies in 1945 and only recently refounded in 1946 as a strictly non-political charitable organization under Allied supervision. The letter is formal, polite, and desperate. They want to negotiate care for German war, dead on Belgian soil. They promise to pay all costs. They ask only for permission to begin the work. The official reads the letter twice, then tosses it aside with a bitter laugh. "We have our own dead to worry about," he tells his secretary. "Let the Germans figure it out themselves, if they can." But the letters keep coming. One every month, then one every 2 weeks. The Volksbund is persistent. And slowly, grudgingly, a few Belgian officials begin to reconsider. Not out of kindness exactly, not out of forgiveness, but out of a pragmatic concern. What happens if they do nothing? Already some German graves are being vandalized, crosses knocked over, stones thrown at markers. In one village, someone dug up a German grave and dumped the remains in a nearby stream. The local priest was horrified, not out of sympathy for the Germans, but because desecrating the dead, any dead, violated something fundamental about human dignity. "If we don't do something organized," one official argues to his colleagues, "we'll have chaos. We'll have German families coming here illegally to search for their dead. We'll have vigilantes desecrating graves. We'll have a public health problem if these bodies aren't properly buried. And we'll look barbaric to the rest of Europe." It's a utilitarian argument, not a moral one, but it's persuasive. There's another factor at work too, one that takes longer to acknowledge: reciprocity. Belgian soldiers killed in Germany need proper graves as well. Any agreement on German war graves in Belgium would necessarily be part of a broader bilateral framework, each nation caring for the other's dead on its soil. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about diplomatic necessity in the emerging post-war order. Between 1947 and 1951, Belgian and German officials engage in careful, confidential negotiations under the watchful eye of Allied occupation authorities. The talks are quiet. No public announcements, no press coverage. If the public found out, there would be outrage. But the conversations continue, slowly building toward an agreement. Kassel, Germany. In a bombed-out office building in Kassel, a small group of Germans meet in a room with broken windows covered by canvas tarps. They are the newly reauthorized Volksbund Deutsche Kriegsgräberfürsorge, operating under strict Allied supervision. Their leader is an architect named Robert Tischler. Tischler is 62 years old, born in 1885. His hands shake when he holds a pencil, a tremor that worsened during the final months of the war when he spent nights in bomb shelters, listening to the city disintegrate above him. But his eyes are clear and determined. He survived World War I as a young officer. He spent the 1920s designing memorials for the war dead. Under the Nazis, he kept his head down and his work apolitical. Now, in the ruins of 1947, he sees his life's final mission. "We cannot change what happened," he tells the others, his voice rough but steady. "We cannot bring back the dead. We cannot undo the crimes committed in Germany's name. But we can do this one thing. We can give these boys a dignified burial. We can show the world that Germany can mourn without celebrating, that we can remember without glorifying." The room is silent. Everyone present understands the delicate line they must walk. The Volksbund's mission is almost impossibly complex. Across Europe, an estimated 1.5 million German soldiers lie in scattered, improvised graves. Many were buried in haste during chaotic retreats. Others were left where they fell, covered by advancing armies or local farmers. Records are incomplete or destroyed. The Wehrmacht's burial documentation system collapsed in the final months of the war. Thousands of soldiers were listed as missing when they were actually dead and buried, just no one knew where. For families back in Germany, the uncertainty is torture. Millions of mothers, wives, children, and siblings have no idea what happened to their loved ones. Did he die quickly or slowly? Was he buried or left to rot? Is there a grave somewhere, or did he simply vanish from the earth? The Volksbund receives hundreds of letters every week, all asking the same desperate questions. Have you found my son, my husband, my brother? Can you tell me where he is? But Tischler and his team see an opportunity beyond just giving families closure. If they can gather these scattered dead into centralized, well-maintained cemeteries, they can accomplish something larger. They can help Germany remember its war dead without repeating the mistakes that led to war in the first place. This is delicate work. In 1947, Germany is occupied, divided, and morally bankrupt. The Nuremberg trials have concluded, revealing daily the depths of Nazi atrocity. The full horror of the Holocaust is becoming known to ordinary Germans who claim they never knew. Any hint of nationalist glorification, any attempt to rehabilitate Wehrmacht honor will destroy the Volksbund's mission before it begins. So, Tischler makes a radical design choice, one that will define his legacy and reshape how Germany remembers its war dead. But he isn't working in isolation. This evolution is part of a broader cultural transformation, driven by Allied re-education programs and the emerging framework of the 1952 federal law on war graves, which would formalize non-heroic, egalitarian principles for German military cemeteries. His cemeteries will be unlike any war memorial Germany has ever built. There will be no towering monuments reaching toward the sky, no heroic statues of soldiers charging forward with rifles raised, no eagles or iron crosses, no quotes from poets about honor and sacrifice. Just simple low stone markers, each one identical, each bearing a name and dates. Officers and privates will lie side by side, generals next to farm boys, SS men next to Wehrmacht conscripts. Unknown soldiers will receive the same respect, the same stone, the same plot size as identified officers. Gleichheit im Tod, Tischler says, spreading his sketches across the table. Equality in death. That is our principle. In death, there is no rank, no privilege, just names and dates, just the fact of their mortality. One of his colleagues, a former Wehrmacht officer, objects. But sir, this shows no honor, no recognition of service. Won't families feel we're diminishing their son's sacrifice? Tischler's eyes harden. They died in service of a criminal regime whose goals brought devastation to Europe. We don't honor that. We mourn it. There's a difference. The room falls silent again. It's 1947, and Germans are still learning how to speak this new language, the language of responsibility without heroism, memory without glorification. Belgian officials remain deeply skeptical of the Volksbund's proposals throughout the protracted negotiations. But in 1954, after years of careful diplomacy, Belgium and the Federal Republic of Germany sign a formal bilateral agreement on war graves. Ratified in 1955 and published in both countries' official gazettes, the treaty establishes the legal framework for German war cemetery construction on Belgian soil, with reciprocal provisions for Belgian graves in Germany. Under this agreement, the Volksbund can begin consolidating German graves, but under strict conditions. No public ceremonies during the work, no German flags at the sites, no military honors, and absolutely no glorification of the Nazi regime. If there's any hint that the Volksbund is trying to rebuild German nationalist pride, the project will be shut down immediately. Tischler accepts every condition without hesitation. We are not here to rebuild pride, he tells the Belgian negotiators. We are here to bury shame with dignity. There is a difference, and we understand it. The Belgians remain wary, but they agree to let the work begin. Hamburg, Germany. Frau Gertrude Hoffmann sits at her kitchen table in a working-class apartment in Hamburg, staring at an envelope. It arrived that morning with Belgian stamps, postmarked Lommel. Her hands tremble as she picks it up, turns it over, sets it down again. For a long moment, she just looks at it. Then she picks up a knife and carefully slits it open. Inside is a single sheet of paper, typed in formal German. Dear Frau Hoffmann, we have located the remains of your son, Gefreiter Hans Hoffmann, born 1924, killed in action, September 1944 near Peer, Belgium. His identification was confirmed through dental records and a dog tag recovered with the remains. His remains have been transferred to the German War Cemetery in Lommel, Belgium. Grave location, Block 8, Row 12, Grave 4. We extend our deepest sympathies for your loss. Volksbund, Deutsche Kriegsgräberfürsorge. Gertrude's hands tremble so badly she drops the letter. It flutters to the floor. She stares at it lying there on the worn linoleum. Those typed words that change everything and nothing. 8 years. For 8 years she has wondered, hoped, feared, dreamed. After Hans stopped writing in August 1944, she heard nothing. The Wehrmacht sent no death notice, no personal effects, no final letter, just silence, the worst kind of silence, the kind that offers no closure, only endless speculation. She assumed he was dead. The rational part of her mind knew he must be. The final letters he sent described constant retreat, chaos, American and British forces closing in from all sides. Young soldiers like Hans, barely trained, thrown into defensive positions against overwhelming force. She knew what that meant, but not knowing for certain felt like drowning slowly, year after year. At night, she sometimes imagined scenarios where he might still be alive. Maybe he was wounded and lost his memory, wandering Europe unable to remember his name. Maybe he was imprisoned in some distant Soviet camp, forgotten in the bureaucratic chaos of demobilization. Maybe he deserted and was hiding somewhere, afraid to come home, afraid of what might happen to deserters. These fantasies were torture, but she couldn't stop them. Hope, even irrational hope, was better than accepting the void. Now she knows. He died at 20. He's buried in Belgium, in a place called Lommel. He has a grave. He has a location. He has coordinates in space and time. He is not lost. He is not wandering. He is not waiting. He is simply dead. For the first time in 8 years, Gertrude Hoffmann cries, not with despair, but with relief. The terrible uncertainty is over. She can finally mourn properly. She picks up the letter again and reads it 3 more times, memorizing every word. Block 8, Row 12, Grave 4. She gets a piece of paper and writes it down carefully. Hans, Lommel, 8/12/4. She folds the paper and puts it in her wallet, where she will carry it every day for the rest of her life. Her story is not unique. By 1952, the Volksbund has sent thousands of similar letters to families across Germany. Each one brings the same complicated gift, the end of uncertainty. Some families receive the news with relief, like Gertrude. Others receive it with renewed grief, as if losing their loved one all over again. But all of them gain something precious: knowledge. They know where their son, husband, father, or brother lies. They know he has a grave. They know he is not forgotten. But Lommel is more than just a practical solution to a logistical problem. It's becoming something unexpected, a symbol of a new kind of memory, a new way of dealing with the difficult past. In her Hamburg apartment, Gertrude Hoffmann begins planning her trip to Belgium. She will go next spring when the weather is better. She will take flowers. She will kneel at Block 8, Row 12, Grave 4, and she will finally say goodbye to her son. She doesn't know it yet, but when she makes that journey, she will be part of something larger, a quiet revolution in how enemies learn to remember each other. 1953 to 1959, Lommel, Belgium. The work begins in earnest on a cold March morning in 1953. Lommel sits in northeastern Belgium, in the province of Limburg, near the Dutch border, a small town surrounded by pine forests and sandy heathland. The landscape is flat, windswept, and melancholy. The soil is sandy and acidic, good for growing pine trees and little else. Local farmers call it armeland, poor land. But for the Volksbund's purposes, it's perfect. The location drains well, which matters when you're burying tens of thousands of bodies. The sandy soil is easy to dig. The site is accessible by road and rail, which matters when you're transporting remains from across Belgium. And perhaps most importantly, Lommel is symbolically neutral. Far from the famous battlefields of Bastogne and the Ardennes, far from the sites of massacres and atrocities, far from places heavy with traumatic memory. It's a place to mourn quietly, without spectacle or confrontation. The Belgian government agrees to lease 44 acres of sandy heathland to the Volksbund. The land is essentially worthless for agriculture, but for the dead, it will serve. Robert Tischler, now 68 years old, makes the journey from Germany to personally oversee the site design. He walks the perimeter slowly, his assistant supporting his arm. He studies the tree lines, the slope of the land, the direction of the prevailing winds. Finally, he nods. "Here," he says simply, "this will work." Starting in 1953, teams of workers begin the grim task of exhumation. They are a mixed crew, German laborers paid by the Volksbund, Belgian workers hired locally, and volunteers from youth peace organizations. They travel across Belgium with maps, metal detectors, and shovels, searching for graves that have been neglected for nearly a decade. They dig up bodies from farmland, forests, village churchyards, and the edges of roads. Each body is carefully exhumed, documented, photographed, and placed in a simple wooden coffin. Before reburial, forensic experts examine the remains, trying to establish identity. They look for dog tags, dental work, wedding rings, letters, photographs, anything that might connect these bones to a name in the records. The work is physically and emotionally exhausting. Many of the bodies are badly decomposed after 8 or 9 years in the ground. Some are just fragments: a skull, a femur, a rib cage, a tattered uniform with a name tag. Others are unidentifiable entirely, reduced to anonymous bones that could be anyone. The workers catalog everything meticulously. Grave 47, Peer Cemetery, partial remains. Male, approximately 20 to 25 years old. Wehrmacht uniform fragments, no identification found. Wedding ring, inscribed K+M 1943. Transferred to Lommel, 15th April 1954. That wedding ring will go into the archives. Maybe someday someone will search for a soldier whose wife was named K or M, married in 1943, and never came home. Maybe that ring will reconnect 2 people across the void of death. But probably not. Probably it will sit in a file box forever, a tiny artifact of a love story that ended in a Belgian field. The work continues for 6 years. Week after week, month after month, the workers dig and transport and bury. Some days, they move 20 bodies. Other days, just 5 or 6. The pace depends on the condition of the graves, the weather, the accuracy of the maps. By 1959, when the consolidation is officially completed, they have transferred 39,108 bodies to Lommel, 26,024 identified, and 13,084 unknown. 6 years of non-stop work, over 100 smaller burial sites emptied and closed. It's the largest consolidation of German war dead in Western Europe. At Lommel, the cemetery takes shape according to Tischler's minimalist design. Low stone crosses mark each grave, flat granite markers, barely 8 inches high, arranged in perfect rows with military precision. There are no individual monuments, no family plots, no variation. Just 39,108 identical markers stretching across 44 acres of flat grassland, bordered by dark pine trees that whisper in the wind. The only variation is in the inscriptions. Some crosses bear names, ranks, dates: Obergefreiter Franz Klein, 1921 to 1944, Unteroffizier Wilhelm Becker, 1923 to 1944. Others bear the most haunting inscription of all: Ein deutscher Soldat, a German soldier. No name, no rank, no story. No family will ever find him. No mother will ever visit his grave. He is anonymous forever. One of 13,084 unknown soldiers at Lommel, their identities lost to time and chaos. Walking through Lommel, you notice something unsettling: the overwhelming sameness. Row after row after row of stone crosses, each one exactly like the last. The effect is powerful and deliberate. This is not a place for individual heroes or personal stories. This is a place that shows the scale of loss, the sheer numbing arithmetic of war. Tischler designs the landscape to reinforce this message. The graves are arranged in rectangular blocks, each block containing hundreds of crosses. Between the blocks are simple grass pathways. At the center of the cemetery, he places a large stone cross, not triumphant, just present. Near the entrance, a small chapel with walls of dark stone and narrow windows that let in thin shafts of light. There are no statues, no heroic imagery, no German flags. The only flag that flies at Lommel is Belgian. This is their country, Tischler explains to his assistants. We are guests here. We come in humility. In January 1959, Robert Tischler dies in his sleep in Kassel, just months before the cemetery's official inauguration. He is 74 years old. His final sketches, found on his desk, are of proposed plantings for Lommel, small flowers that might grow in the sandy soil, adding color without disrupting the somber tone. His colleagues follow his plans exactly. September 6, 1959, Lommel German War Cemetery. The inauguration ceremony is small, somber, and carefully choreographed to avoid any hint of triumphalism. No military bands, no marching units, no speeches about valor or honor. Just a few hundred people gathered on a gray September morning. German diplomats in dark suits, Belgian clergy in vestments, families of the fallen, and representatives of the Volksbund. A cold wind blows across the heath, rustling through the pine trees that border the cemetery. The sky is overcast, threatening rain. The mood is appropriate, heavy, reflective, weighted with history. A Belgian priest speaks first in French. Father Anton Verbeek is a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, a veteran of the Belgian resistance who spent 2 years in hiding after helping Allied pilots escape. His choice to speak today is deliberate, a gesture of reconciliation from someone who has every reason to hate. His message is clear and carefully worded. We bury these soldiers not to honor the regime they served, but to recognize their humanity. They were sons, brothers, fathers. In death, we offer what we could not in life, compassion. We do this not because they deserve it, but because we choose to be better than our enemies were. We do this because desecrating the dead, any dead, diminishes our own humanity. He pauses, looking out over the rows of stone crosses. These graves are a reminder of the cost of hatred. They are a warning. They say, this is what happens when we forget that our enemies are human beings. This is what happens when we allow ideology to override compassion. Remember this, learn from this, and God willing, never repeat it. There is no applause, just silence and the sound of wind. A German official responds next, speaking in German with a French translator beside him. Dr. Wilhelm Huppenbauer is a diplomat, a technocrat, carefully chosen because he has no military background and no connection to the Nazi Party. His voice is thick with emotion, and twice he has to pause to compose himself. We thank the people of Belgium for their grace and their courage, he says. We know what happened here. We know what German soldiers did in this country. We know the suffering we caused. We cannot undo it. We cannot apologize enough. But we can do this. We can remember honestly. These graves are not monuments to victory. They are monuments to waste, to the destruction that comes when a nation loses its moral way. He gestures toward the endless rows of crosses. Look at them, 39,000 men, most of them younger than 25. They should have lived long lives. They should have had children and grandchildren. They should have built things instead of destroying them. But they died here, far from home, and their deaths accomplished nothing except more suffering. He wipes his eyes. We remember them today not to honor what they did, but to recognize what was lost, and to commit ourselves to ensuring that German soldiers never again march into Belgium or anywhere else in conquest. No one mentions Adolf Hitler. No one mentions the Third Reich. No one mentions the Holocaust. The silences are intentional, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. After the speeches, people walk among the graves. Some families have traveled from Germany, mothers, widows, siblings, now able to visit their dead for the first time in 15 years. They kneel in the grass, place flowers on the low crosses, weep quietly. Gertrude Hoffmann is among them. She made the journey from Hamburg by train, traveling for 2 days, carrying a bouquet of white roses. Now she stands at Block 8, Row 12, Grave 4, staring at her son's name carved in stone. Gefreiter Hans Hoffmann, 1924 to 1944. 20 years old. He was 20 years old. She kneels slowly, her joints aching, and places the roses at the base of the cross. She touches the stone, running her fingers over the carved letters of his name. She stays there for a long time, her lips moving in silent conversation with her dead son. Nearby, another woman, elderly, dressed in black, moves slowly down a row of crosses, running her hand along each one. She stops at a grave marked Ein Deutscher Soldat and sinks to her knees in the grass. She has no idea if her son is here. His body was never found. The Wehrmacht listed him as missing in action, presumed dead. But this unknown soldier could be him, or it could be someone else's son. Either way, she mourns. She pulls out a small photograph from her purse, a young man in Wehrmacht uniform, smiling awkwardly at the camera. She props the photograph against the stone cross, even though she knows it doesn't belong to this grave, even though this might not be her son. "I don't know where you are, Peter," she whispers, "but I need to say goodbye somewhere. Forgive me." She stays kneeling for 20 minutes, crying silently. When she finally rises, she leaves the photograph there. By tomorrow it will be gone, taken by the wind or removed by a groundskeeper. But for today, it sits there beside the stone, a face to go with the anonymous name. A reporter from Der Spiegel watches the scene, taking notes. Later, he will write, "Lommel is not a monument to victory. It is not even a monument to honorable defeat. It is a monument to the cost of losing our way." Walking among these 39,108 graves, one does not feel pride. One feels waste, overwhelming, irredeemable waste. Another observer, a Belgian veteran who fought at Bastogne, stands at the edge of the cemetery, arms crossed, watching German families mourn their dead. He is angry at first, angry at being here, angry at the very idea of a German cemetery on Belgian soil. But as he watches, his anger softens into something more complicated. These people are not monsters. They're just grieving families. That old woman crying over the unknown soldier, she could be his own mother. That young couple laying flowers, they could be his neighbors. The dead in the ground are not demons. They're just young men who died too soon. He doesn't forgive them. He's not sure he can. But standing there on that cold September morning, he understands something he didn't before. Grief is grief, regardless of which uniform was worn. The dead are equally dead, whether they fought for the right side or the wrong one. It's an uncomfortable realization, but it's a truthful one. By late afternoon, the ceremony ends. People drift away slowly, reluctant to leave. The cemetery falls quiet again, just the sound of wind through the pines and the distant cry of crows. 39,000 stones stand in perfect rows, holding the earth down over the dead. The revolution has begun. 1960s to 1970s. Lommel and beyond. Something unexpected begins to happen in the years following the inauguration. Belgians start visiting Lommel too. At first, it's just curious locals, people who remember the war, who want to see what the Germans have built on Belgian soil. They come with suspicion, expecting something glorifying or nationalist. Instead, they find something unsettling: simplicity, humility, and overwhelming sadness. "It's not what I expected," one visitor writes in the cemetery's guest book in 1961. "I thought it would make me angry. Instead, it just makes me tired. So many dead. What was it all for?" Gradually, the visits take on a different tone. Belgian veterans come, sometimes with their families. They walk the rows silently, reading names and dates, doing the arithmetic in their heads. This boy was 19. That one was 18. This officer was 32. Ancient by the standards of the dead here. They remember their own friends who died in the fighting. Henri, shot during the initial invasion in 1940. Jacques, killed by a V-2 rocket in Antwerp in 1944. Marcel, who survived the war but never recovered from what he saw, who died by his own hand in 1947. The dead on both sides were young. The dead on both sides were scared. This truth doesn't excuse anything, but it complicates the simple narratives of heroism and villainy. In 1968, something remarkable happens. A Belgian teacher named Paul Verhoeven brings his students to Lommel as part of a history lesson. It's controversial. Some parents complain, arguing that visiting a German cemetery honors the enemy. But Verhoeven persists. He leads his 30 students, 14 and 15 years old, born after the war, through the rows of crosses. He shows them the names, the dates, the mathematics of loss. Then he stops at a grave marked Ein Deutscher Soldat and gathers the students around. These men were our enemies, he says carefully. They invaded our country. They killed our people. They served a regime that committed unthinkable crimes. We should never forget that. We should never excuse it. He pauses, letting that sink in. But look at them now. They're just names on stones. Most of them were younger than your older brothers. They didn't choose this war. They didn't decide to invade Belgium. They were conscripted, trained, fed propaganda, and sent to die. Some of them believed in the Nazi cause. Others were just scared boys trying to survive. Most of them, we'll never know which. One student raises his hand. Should we feel sorry for them? Verhoeven considers the question carefully. I don't know if we should feel sorry for them, but we should remember them. Because if we forget what war does, if we forget that enemies are people too, we'll make the same mistakes again. That's what this place is for. Not to make us feel good, not to forgive, but to remember the full cost. Another student asks, "Do you hate them, sir?" Verhoeven is quiet for a long moment. I hate what they did. I hate what they represented. But standing here, looking at 39,000 graves, I don't know. Maybe I'm just too tired to hate anymore. Maybe that's what this place does. It makes you too tired to hate. It's not the answer the students expected, but it's honest. This becomes a pattern. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, more Belgian schools bring students to Lommel. More veterans visit, working through complicated feelings. The cemetery becomes a place of encounter. Not reconciliation exactly, but recognition. Recognition that the enemy wore a human face. That evil is often committed by ordinary people who convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. In 1972, the transformation deepens with the launch of the Volksbund Jugendbegegnungsstätte Lommel, a formal youth exchange facility. German and Belgian teenagers begin spending weeks together in organized work camps, maintaining the cemetery, pulling weeds, cleaning stones, repainting markers. They sleep in shared dormitories and talk late into the night about history, guilt, and responsibility. The conversations are often difficult and uncomfortable. One German teenager, Klaus, describes his experience in 1974. My grandfather fought in Belgium. He never talked about it. He kept his medals in a drawer and never looked at them. I thought maybe he was ashamed, but I didn't know why. Coming to Lommel, I understood. These graves, they're heavy. They make you think about what it means to serve a cause that's wrong. Can you be a victim and a perpetrator at the same time? I don't know, but my grandfather probably thought about that every day until he died. A Belgian student, Marie, responds, My great-uncle was killed by German soldiers near Antwerp in 1944. For a long time, I hated Germans. I didn't know any, but I hated them anyway. But being here, working next to Klaus and the others, I don't know. I still hate what happened. I still hate the Nazi regime, but I can't hate them. They weren't even born when it happened. And the boys buried here, most of them probably didn't want to be here either. It's complicated. A Dutch volunteer, Johan, adds his perspective. In the Netherlands, we have German cemeteries too. My grandmother refuses to drive past them. She lost 2 brothers in the war. She can't forgive. Maybe she shouldn't have to. But I think there's a difference between not forgiving and not learning. We can remember the crimes without dehumanizing the people who committed them. Because once we dehumanize our enemies, we become capable of the same things. These conversations, messy, painful, unresolved, are Lommel's real legacy. Not easy forgiveness, not comfortable reconciliation, but the hard work of seeing the enemy as human while still holding them accountable. This is what Robert Tischler dreamed of. Versöhnung über den Gräbern, reconciliation over the graves. Not reconciliation as forgetting, but reconciliation as honest remembrance. By the late 1970s, Lommel has become a recognized center for peace education. The programs expand. Belgian, Dutch, and German, students participate in weekend seminars on war memory, moral responsibility, and the dangers of nationalism. They study primary sources, letters from soldiers, diaries, photographs. They interview elderly visitors who come to mourn. They learn that history is not abstract, not just dates and battles, but individual lives interrupted, ended, destroyed. One particularly powerful program pairs German students with Belgian veterans. The format is simple. They sit together and talk. The veterans share their experiences of occupation, resistance, liberation. The German students share what they've learned about their own family histories. Grandfathers who fought, grandmothers who survived bombing raids, relatives who collaborated or resisted, or just tried to survive. These conversations are awkward at first. What do you say to someone whose country your grandfather helped occupy? How do you apologize for something you didn't do, but that still somehow belongs to you? But gradually, connections form. Not forgiveness necessarily. Some veterans cannot and should not forgive, but understanding. A recognition of shared humanity across the chasm of historical trauma. In 1976, a Belgian veteran named Georges Delacroix participates in one of these programs. He is 72 years old, a former resistance fighter who helped sabotage German supply lines and shelter Allied airmen. He has every reason to hate Germans. He lost his brother and 2 cousins to Wehrmacht firing squads. He spent 6 months in a German prison where he was beaten regularly. He agrees to speak with a young German student named Martin, whose grandfather served in Belgium during the occupation. They sit across from each other in a small room at the youth center. For a long moment, neither speaks. Then, Georges begins. "Your grandfather's unit was stationed near my village," he says quietly, looking at documents Martin has brought. "The 347th Infantry Division. They were there for 3 years." Martin nods, his throat tight. "Yes. He never talked about it. I found his papers after he died." "What do you want to know?" Georges asks. "I want to know if he did terrible things," Martin says, his voice breaking. "I want to know if my grandfather was a monster." Georges is quiet for a long time. "I don't know your grandfather," he finally says. "I can't tell you what he did or didn't do. But I can tell you this. Some German soldiers were monsters. They tortured and killed without mercy. Others were just scared boys trying to survive. Most were somewhere in between, capable of kindness and cruelty, depending on the day, the circumstances, the orders they received." "Does that make it better or worse?" Martin asks. "Neither," Georges says. "It just makes it true. Monsters are easy to fight. Monsters are easy to hate. But ordinary people committing monstrous acts, that's much harder to understand. And much more important to understand. Because you could be those people. I could be those people. Under the right circumstances, with the right pressures, most of us are capable of terrible things." Martin wipes his eyes. "I don't know how to carry this. This guilt for something I didn't do." Georges leans forward. "You don't carry guilt. You carry responsibility. There's a difference. You're not guilty of your grandfather's actions, but you are responsible for how you respond to that history. You're responsible for learning from it, for ensuring it doesn't happen again. That's not a burden. That's a duty." They talk for 2 more hours. When they finish, they shake hands. It's not forgiveness. It's not reconciliation. But it's something. A bridge built across an impossible distance. These encounters multiply throughout the 1970s. Slowly, Lommel transforms from a cemetery into a living laboratory for moral education. Students don't just visit, they engage. They wrestle with difficult questions, they confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, about complicity, about the thin line between civilization and barbarism. The cemetery becomes what Tischler envisioned, not a monument to the dead, but a classroom for the living. 1990s to present day. Lommel German War Cemetery. After German reunification in 1990, new archival materials become available. East German military records, previously inaccessible, are open to researchers. The Volksbund gains access to Soviet documents detailing German casualties. New forensic technologies, DNA analysis, advanced dental record matching, computerized database searches allow for renewed identification efforts. But between 1990 and 2005, the Volksbund successfully identifies 427 previously unknown soldiers buried at Lommel. Each identification triggers a new letter to a family, arriving decades after the war ended. In 1994, a woman named Helga Schneider received such a letter. She is 68 years old, living in Cologne. The letter informs her that her father, missing since 1944, presumed dead but never confirmed, has been identified at Lommel through dental records. She was 4 years old when he left for the war. She has no memory of him, only a faded photograph her mother kept on the mantel. "I thought I'd feel relief," she tells a journalist later, "but instead, I felt angry. 50 years. For 50 years we didn't know. My mother died not knowing, and now they tell me? What am I supposed to do with this information?" But she goes to Lommel anyway. She stands at her father's grave, block 14, row 7, grave 23, and tries to feel something: connection, closure, grief for a man she never knew. What she feels instead is a profound sadness that transcends personal loss. Looking across the rows of crosses, she realizes every one of these stones represents a family like hers, a mother who waited, a wife who never remarried, children who grew up without fathers. And for what? For a regime that committed genocide, for a war that destroyed Europe. For nothing. This place should be required visiting for every German, she says, not to feel proud, not to honor sacrifice, but to see the price of following the wrong leaders. By the 2000s, Lommel has become integrated into European heritage networks. The European Union funds preservation programs. School groups from across the continent visit as part of history curricula. The cemetery is listed in guidebooks, not as a tourist attraction, but as a site of moral significance, one of the places where Europe confronts its darkest history. In 2004, the Volksbund opens the Haus, Über Grenzen, House Across Borders, a permanent peace education center adjacent to the cemetery. It's a modern building, glass and steel, designed to contrast with the somber historical cemetery. Inside are exhibition halls, classrooms, a research library, and overnight accommodations for student groups. The exhibitions are unflinching. They show the rise of Nazism, the atrocities committed by German forces, the collaboration and resistance in occupied countries, the Holocaust. They also show the aftermath, the millions of displaced persons, the destroyed cities, the fractured families, the long road to reconciliation. One exhibition room is dedicated to letters, correspondence between German soldiers and their families during the war. The curators deliberately choose letters that complicate simple narratives. Here's a soldier writing home about the beauty of the Belgian countryside. Here's another describing his fear and exhaustion. Here's one expressing doubt about the war. And here's one expressing enthusiasm for Nazi ideology and contempt for inferior peoples. The exhibition doesn't tell visitors what to think. It presents the complexity and lets them wrestle with it. Another room contains objects recovered from graves during exhumation: wedding rings, pocket watches, photographs, letters, good luck charms. Each object has a story, though most of those stories are lost. A brass cigarette case engraved with initials, a small wooden cross, handmade, carried for protection. A photograph of a young woman, smiling, tucked into a soldier's uniform pocket when he died. These objects humanize the dead in ways that statistics cannot. They transform 39,108 casualties into 39,108 individuals, each with private hopes and fears, each with people who love them and mourn them. Today, Lommel receives between 200,000 and 250,000 visitors annually, with numbers reaching as high as 400,000 during major European heritage commemorations. Some come for personal reasons, descendants of the buried, researchers, veterans. Others come as part of organized educational programs. Still others stumble upon it accidentally, traveling through Belgium, and stop out of curiosity. The cemetery has changed little since 1959. The crosses remain low and uniform. The grass is meticulously maintained. The pine trees have grown taller, now forming a dense border that seems to hold the cemetery in a protective embrace. New paths have been added for accessibility. A digital database allows visitors to search for specific graves, but the essential character remains: simple, somber, and profoundly moving. Walking through Lommel today, you feel the weight of collective memory pressing down. This is not a place that glorifies war. It doesn't celebrate heroism or honor sacrifice. Instead, it confronts you with the blunt arithmetic of violence. 39,108 lives, most of them young, all of them dead, many of them buried under someone else's name, or no name at all. The rows seem endless. You walk, and the crosses keep coming, each one identical, each one representing a person who woke up one morning, ate breakfast, wrote a letter home, cleaned his rifle, and then died, shot, shelled, blown apart, or simply collapsed from exhaustion and never got up. Some graves have flowers placed by relatives who still remember. Others have nothing, just the stone and the grass, visited only by the rain and the wind. At the cemetery's center stands the main memorial cross, 20 feet tall, the only vertical element in this horizontal landscape. It bears no inscription except a simple date, 1939 to 1945. The years of the war, the years these men died. Nearby is a meditation chapel, a small dark building with rough stone walls and narrow windows. Inside, it's cool and quiet. Light filters through stained glass, casting colored shadows on the floor. There are no religious symbols except a simple cross. Ecumenical, non-denominational. The chapel is for reflection, not worship. For sitting with difficult thoughts, not escaping them. A guest book sits on a table near the exit. Visitors leave comments in multiple languages. My grandfather is buried here. I never met him, but I'm glad he has a proper grave. Marcus, Germany. This place makes me sad and angry and grateful all at once. Sad for the waste. Angry at what caused it. Grateful we've learned from it. Sophie, Belgium. Never again. Anonymous. These were someone's children. All of them. Remember that. Marie, France. I didn't expect to cry, but I did. For them, for their families, for all of us. David, United Kingdom. The comments reflect Lommel's complex legacy. This is not a place that offers easy answers or comfortable emotions. It doesn't tell you how to feel about the German war dead. It doesn't dictate whether you should forgive or condemn. It simply presents the reality. Here lie 39,108 people who died in a catastrophic war that should never have happened. What you do with that reality is up to you. Present day, Block 8, Row 12. There's a stone cross in Lommel that reads, Gefreiter Hans Hoffmann, 1924 to 1944. If you visit on a clear day, you might find flowers there, fresh roses left by someone who still remembers. Hans's mother, Gertrude, visited every year from 1953 until she died in 1983, taking the train from Hamburg to Lommel, carrying flowers and speaking quietly to her dead son. After that, his sister Ilse came, making the pilgrimage annually until her own death in 2001. Then Ilse's daughters took over the tradition. Now, Hans's great-nieces make the trip, young women in their 20s and 30s who never met Hans but know his story intimately. They know he was 20 when he died. They know he liked to draw and wanted to be an architect after the war. They know he wrote letters home, saying he was scared, but trying to be brave. They know he sent a sketch to his mother in his final letter, a drawing of a Belgian farmhouse he thought was beautiful, even as the war raged around him. That sketch still exists, framed in his great-niece's apartment in Berlin. They know he died in September 1944, during the chaotic German retreat from Belgium. They know he was shot by American soldiers near the town of Peer, and that he bled out in a ditch while his unit retreated without him. They know local Belgian civilians found his body and buried him temporarily in a sugar beet field, and that he lay there for 9 years before being moved to Lommel. They also know something else. Hans is one of the lucky ones. He has a name. He has a story. He has people who remember. Right next to his grave, separated by just 2 feet of grass, is another cross. Ein deutscher Soldat. No name, no dates, just an anonymous designation, unknown soldier. The forensic examination revealed only basic information. Male, approximately 18 to 22 years old, killed by shrapnel wounds to the chest and abdomen, buried in the same field as Hans Hoffmann, probably died in the same battle. No dog tag, no letters, no personal effects except a tarnished wedding ring with no inscription. Someone married this boy. Someone waited for him to come home. Someone spent decades wondering what happened, checking mailboxes for letters that never came, jumping at every knock on the door, hoping for news. Someone died not knowing. Hans Hoffmann's great-niece, Anna, sometimes places flowers on the unknown soldier's grave, too. She doesn't know why, exactly. It just seems right. Both boys died too young. Both deserved better. Both were casualties of a catastrophic failure of human morality. "I do it for his family," Anna explains when asked. "Whoever they were. Wherever they are. Maybe they're all dead now, too. But maybe someone's great-niece, like me, is out there somewhere, wondering where their great-uncle is buried. This might be him, or it might not. But someone should remember him anyway. Both crosses are identical in size and shape. Both lie beneath the same sky, surrounded by the same 39,106 other stones. The grass grows equally over both graves. The rain falls on both without discrimination. In death, at least, they are equal. That is Lommel's quiet revolution. Not that Germans and Belgians learned to forgive each other, but that they learned to see each other, to recognize that beneath the uniforms and ideologies and national allegiances, war kills individuals, people with names and families and hopes and fears, people who were loved and missed and mourned. The cemetery doesn't ask you to forgive the Wehrmacht or excuse Nazi crimes. It doesn't ask you to forget collaboration or minimize atrocities. It simply asks you to remember that war is not an abstraction. It's 39,108 separate tragedies, multiplied by all the families who lost someone, multiplied by all the wars and all the centuries of human history. Robert Tischler understood this. That's why he designed Lommel the way he did. Low crosses, uniform markers, no hierarchy, no glory. Just names and dates. Just the plain fact of mortality. Just the overwhelming arithmetic of loss. Standing in Lommel, surrounded by 39,108 graves, you cannot escape the scale of what war destroys. You cannot romanticize it or sanitize it or transform it into noble sacrifice. You can only bear witness to the waste. And perhaps that's the point. Perhaps bearing witness is enough. Perhaps remembering honestly, without glory, without excuses, without looking away, is how we prevent it from happening again. Or perhaps not. History suggests humanity repeatedly constructs ideologies that justify violence, generation after generation finding new reasons to kill. Perhaps cemeteries like Lommel will always be necessary, grimly cataloging our failures. But standing there among the stones, watching sunlight filter through the pine trees, listening to the wind whisper across the grass, you hope otherwise. You hope that places like Lommel can teach us something, that they can make us pause before following the wrong leaders, before embracing the wrong ideologies, before convincing ourselves that our enemies are less than human. You hope that 39,108 graves might be enough.